The Triassic period was the time of recovery after the devastation of the end Permian faunal and flora crisis. This was also a period of very high global temperatures. Dinosaurs and mammals evolved into the empty ecosystems on land and were able to spread rapidly in the sea. Modern corals appeared while sea urchins began to diversify after having almost become extinct at the end of the Permian. The world's landmasses were still combined in the supercontinent of Pangaea, which extended from pole to pole. This reached its maximum extent around the time of the Middle to Late Triassic boundary, when due to lower sea levels Earth's land area was greater. The Paleo-Tethys Ocean began to contract as Cimmeria spread north at a faster pace than the eastern extension of Pangaea that is now North China. By the end of the Triassic, the world map was changing. Pangaea began to break up, a process that was to continue through the rest of the Mesozoic into the Cenozoic. After the end of the Permian period, rapid global warming in the early Triassic produced one of the hottest periods in Earth's history. Some estimates put subtropical marine surface temperatures as high as 38 degrees C. During this period, the large size of the Pangaea gave rise to extreme climatic zonation, with some areas becoming very dry whereas others were influenced by monsoonal condition. One consequence of this zonation was the separation of plants into distinct northern and southern realms. Climates were very warm even in high latitude. Sand, both poles were ice-free and were warm even in winter. The Great Late Permian mass extinction cleared the field for many new kinds of invertebrate marine organisms. Extinctions are both destructive and constructive, but the Triassic was itself terminated by yet another mass extinction, the fourth during the Phanerozoic. It took several million years of marine life to recover fully from the Permian catastrophe. Among the first post-extinction life forms were stromatolites. It was like a return to the Precambrian. By the early Triassic, most elements of the Cambrian fauna had vanished and the Paleozoic fauna had been severely damaged, especially with the loss of so many groups of brachiopods whose role as dominant seafloor filter feeders was taken over by bivalves. Greater than it was during the Triassic that the modern evolutionary fauna, which had begun in a small way during the Ordovician, became dominant. Paleozoic echinoids were replaced by new versions, and scleractinian corals derived independently from soft-bodied sea anemones appeared. It seems that there were several extinction events during the later Triassical, though their causes are not well understood. Possible causes are climatic change and falling sea levels leading to habitat loss. This small brachiopod had perforations in its upper shell that in life housed small bristles. The function of the bristles may have been sensory or to aid respiration. Inside the smaller valvia loop of calcite would have supported the lophophore, which was the animal's feeding organ. There is a small opening in the larger valve through which a muscular stalk, the pedicle, would have extended to attach the animal to the seabed. A thickened ring extends around the inside of the pedicle, opening the outer edge of the smaller valve is gently folded outward. The larger valve has a corresponding infold. The main pattern on the shell is a series of growth lines which are crossed by fine radial ribs. Some specimens of this genus have been found with bands of color running across the valves, a feature rarely seen in fossils. Monophilites was one of the earliest members of the phyloceratid ammonoids. This group evolved in the early Triassic from Mecoveras and survived to the end of the Cretaceous, changing little during this time. They are characterized by the leaf-shaped terminations of the forward-facing folds of the suture lines. The suture lines mark where the walls of the internal chambers join the inside of the shell. Like most pyoceratids, Monophilites has a disc-shaped form, with slightly overlapping whorls. Distribution patterns showed that this group preferred open seas to more shallow water. Preflorianites was a ceratided ammonoid from the early Triassic. It had a simple ceratidic suture, meaning that the folded joints between the internal walls and the shell have a serrated pattern where they face away from the shell's living chamber or aperture. The whorls that make up the spiral shell only overlap each other slightly. Shells like this, where most of each whorl is visible, are described as evolute. The whorls are rounded in cross-section and converge into a rounded venter, which is the outer curve of the last whorl. Mecoceras was a smooth ceratided ammonite. The genus was discovered in the western USA in 1879. It is usually fairly tightly coiled and has a small umbilicus, the navel-like structure at the center of the shell. Such coiling is said to be involute. As the animal matures, the coiling becomes less tight and the umbilicus widens. The sides of the shell are slightly convex, and the ventral side of the shell is usually flat. Ceratites gives its name to the Ceratatina, a major suborder of ammonoids that originated during the Middle Permian. The great majority of Triassic ammonoids belonged to this suborder, and they became a very successful group that flourished until their extinction at the end of the Triassic. The suture lines, which were strongly folded on ceratites, marked the point where the internal walls dividing the shell met the inside of the shell. The folds that faced towards the shell opening were simple, smooth curves, while those facing backwards are finely serrated. A suture line with this combination is known as ceratitic. The two valves, or shells, of Archosaurs were elongated and the two beaks lay very close together. The hinge lacked interlocking teeth, and there would have been a strong external ligament to open and close the valves. Archosaurs lived buried deeply in the seabed, with two siphons that extended up to the seafloor emerging from its permanently gaping posterior end. One siphon sucked in oxygenated water that also carried food particles, while the other expelled deoxygenated water and waste. Encrinus was a crinoid with a large cup consisting of 3 circlets of plates. The cup displays 5-fold symmetry and the base is slightly concave. It was topped by 10 arms, which would have borne many smaller branches called pinnules. When the arms and pinnules were splayed, they formed a feeding fan. In life, the mouth was hidden beneath a leathery dome, called the tegmen, that formed the roof of the cup. Particles of food were passed along the arms via food grooves that led to further food grooves below the tegmen. These were lined with tiny hair-like structures called cilia that led to the mouth. The stem is circular in cross-section and features larger, regularly spaced bone-like structures between more frequent, smaller ones. Encrinus is the last survivor of a very large group of crinoids that can be traced back to the early Ordovician. Most of them died out during the Permian extinction. The Triassic was a critical time in vertebrate evolution. It is regarded as the birth of modern ecosystems, as successful living groups such as mammals, turtles and archosaurs arose in the aftermath of the devastating Permo-Triassic extinction, which killed off many primitive reptile and amphibian groups. The list of vertebrates that arose during the Triassic is staggering: dinosaurs, crocodilomorphs, pterosaurs, mammals, turtles, ichthyosaurs and frogs. The Triassic, which stretched from 250 to 200 million years ago, was a time of transition. Archaic groups that had dominated Permian ecosystems, such as many mammal-like reptiles, had faded into extinction, and the arid landscape of Triassic I see Pangaea as the perfect breeding ground for entirely new groups of vertebrates, many of which remain successful today. The Archosaurs include living birds and crocodilians along with a range of extinct groups restricted to the Mesozoic, such as the dinosaurs. Archosaurs originated approximately 245 million years ago and quickly spread across the globe, diversifying into an array of different species which generally can be divided into 2 groups based on the anatomy. To the ankle, the bird-like Archosaurs have a straight hinge joint between the ankle bones and the foot which allows for rapid locomotion. However, crocodile-lined Archosaurs have a ball and socket joint between the astragalus and calcaneum bones of the ankle. This joint allows the bones to rotate against each other, which offered a degree of maneuverability but prevented most crocodile-lined Archosaurs from attaining high speed. Dinosaurs are the most familiar of the extinct Archosaur groups and are closely related to the flying pterosaurs. The earliest known dinosaurs appeared at the beginning of the late Triassic, approximately 230 million years ago. Dinosaurs quickly diversified into an array of different body forms, but it took them much longer to multiply into a large number of species and to become exceptionally abundant in individual ecosystems. The most primitive dinosaurs were sleek bipedal predators boasting an arsenal of serrated teeth and sharp claws. From these small carnivorous ancestors, dinosaurs proceeded to divide into 2 major groups: the Saurischians and the Ornithischians. Saurichthyes, meaning lizardfish, was a fast open water hunter similar to present-day barracuda. This primitive ray-finned fish was a top predator. Its streamlined shape, posteriorly positioned pelvic fins and forked tail can be clearly in its fossils. Whether it hunted in groups like barracuda or laid in wait for its prey is not known. One of its closest modern relatives is the sturgeon. Mastodonsaurus was the first early amphibian to be recognized and described in 1828. It is far larger than any other fossil amphibian ever found. Although the skull is crocodile-like in shape and very large, it is more like a frog's in its construction. Time equals 0.4s, greater than it was assumed at first that it had a squat, rounded body like a frog. It was only when bones from the body were found that it became apparent that the creature resembled a thick-set crocodile with a gigantic head and no neck. The Metaposaurus were a family of amphibians that were widespread for a short time in the late Triassic. This was when the supercontinent Pangaea was just beginning to split up and was crisscrossed by rift valleys filled with lakes and rivers. It spread along these waterways, which explains why they have been found in many parts of the world. By the end of the Triassic, Metaposaurs had been replaced by early crocodiles. A nearly complete late Triassic ecosystem has been reconstructed from the rich fossil deposits of the Bristol Channel region that lies between England and Wales. About 205 million years ago, this area was home to a labyrinth of small caves that formed after the thick limestone bedrock was eroded by acidic rainwater. The remains of a menagerie of small animals have been found in these dark caverns, having been drowned and washed inside by monsoon floods. They ranged in size from small sauropodomorph dinosaurs, which were up to 3 meters long, to minute sphenodontian reptiles just 10 centimeters. The most common sphenodontian was Diphidontosaurus. Once a diverse group of Tuatara of New Zealand is now the only living member. It was far smaller than the Tuatara, which may have been an adaptation for hunting down its insect prey in crevices. Turtles have a classic body plan that is not seen in any other group. This includes a short skull, a tiny tail and a thick shell that surrounds the body. The mystery of how the turtle shell evolved has been clarified by Odontocheles, the oldest and most primitive turtle ever discovered. It had a fully formed plastron, but lacked a carapace. This shows that the shell began as armor on the belly, with the carapace forming much later as the ribs became thicker and broader and fused with bony plates inside the skin. Nothosaurs filled the same general niche that seals do today. Like seals, these reptiles primarily lived in the water, but they also came ashore to rest. Lariosaurus was one of the smallest known nothosaurs. Its front feet were webbed flippers and, uniquely, its hind feet retained 5 indiva. Dual toes. This suggests that it was more active on land than other nothosaurs, and it may have hunted small shoreline animals as well as fish. Living alongside nothosaurs in the warm shallow seas that covered Europe in the Middle Triassic were some peculiar reptiles called placodonts. The most common and best studied placodont is Placodus. It had all the characteristic features of the placodonts: a large, barrel-chested body, webbed hand and feet that formed paddles, and a long, deep tail. The hands, feet and tail were specially adapted for swimming, and indicate that Placodus was probably an accomplished swimmer despite its bulky frame. It is also likely that it spent time out of the water feeding and mating, although it was probably a clumsy creature on land. Placodont skulls look quite unusual. They feature distinct protruding teeth at the front of the jaw, and a series of smooth, peg-like teeth on the roof of the mouth. This strange collection of teeth is unlike anything found in any other reptiles. It is thought the front teeth were used for spearing fish and the ones in the roof of the mouth were for crushing the hard shells of mollusks. There are 2 subgroups of nothosaurs, Nothosaurids and Pachypleurosaurids. The most characteristic Pachypleurosaurid is Pachypleurosaurus. Its body was long and thin with an elongated neck, and its limbs acted as robust paddles and for steering and stability in the water. This agile reptile swam by laterally undulating its slim yet muscular torso. One of the oldest known members of the ichthyosaur group, Mixosaurus, lived right across the globe during the early Triassic. It had the characteristic ichthyosaur body plan, which resembles the dolphins of today. Most notably, the snout was long and slender, the torso was streamlined, the limbs were modified into paddles, the tail was deep, and there was a dorsal fin for stability in the water. Mixosaurus was undoubtedly a fast swimmer and used its speed to surge through schools of fish, which made up the bulk of its diet. Compared to most other ichthyosaurs, it was small, with most individuals falling short of 1 meter in length. However, some later cousins reached more than 4 times that size. Not only was Mixosaurus one of the smallest ichthyosaurs, but it was also among the most primitive. In fact, it was so named because the German paleontologist George Bauer, who first studied it, thought it showed a mixture of primitive and advanced characteristics. The small frame of Procolophon and other procolophinid reptiles belies their ability to survive global catastrophes. Although unspectacular at first glance, these sluggish reptiles were one of the few groups to endure the devastating Permo-Triassic extinction. After surviving the most destructive global die-off in Earth's history, Procolophonids evolved into a new array of species. One of these was Procolophon, the namesake of the group. It was no larger than a small iguana. It had a wide body and small tail, and its broad, triangular skull is similar to that of many burrowing reptiles living today. Perhaps Procolophonids survived the extinction by hiding away in burrows, sequestering themselves from intense bouts of heat and cold and showers of acid rain. Rhynchosaurs were just one of many groups of herbivorous reptiles that lived during the late Triassic. They were also among the main land-dwelling herbivores that existed around the globe immediately prior to the origination of dinosaurs, as well as during the first few million years of dinosaur evolution. One of the best-studied rhynchosaurs is Hyperottopedon, a species represented by over 35 skeletons from 230-million-year-old rocks discovered in Scotland. Its skull was broad and triangular when viewed from above. Its sharp beak, composed of a pair of tusks, which had razor-sharp edges that formed a scissor-like mechanism designed to shear through vegetation. Farther back in the jaw, rows of teeth at the sides of the snout and on the roof of the mouth ground down food before it was swallowed. Its body was short and stocky, and it may have used its limbs to dig small holes, which would have enabled this barrel-chested herbivore to access nutritious tubers and roots. Rhynchosaurs became extinct during the late Triassic. It is thought that their disappearance allowed dinosaurs to replace them as the dominant land-based herbivores. Tanystropheus must rank among the most bizarre reptiles of all time, instantly recognizable by its outsized, noodle-like neck that was longer than its body and tail combined. This extraordinary neck was more than 3 meters long, about twice the height of an average man, yet it possessed only 10 greatly elongated cervical vertebrae to support it. A semi-aquatic animal that fed primarily on fish, Tanystropheus could capture fish in the murky waters of the seashore by rapidly extending its neck. This strategy allowed it to take fish while its body remained completely still, in some cases while it stood on dry land. Following the Permo-Triassic mass extinction, entirely new groups of organisms emerged. One of these was Proterosuchus, a Komodo dragon-sized predator that is a distant cousin of the Archosaurs. The large group that contains birds, crocodiles and dinosaurs. The skull of Proterosuchus was long and narrow, with enlarged eye sockets and numerous small, curved teeth. The body was also long and thin, with a flexible, tapering tail. It is likely that it alternated between living on land and in the water, giving it unparalleled access to a range of prey. Although quite small even by today's standards, Proterosuchus was among the largest carnivores of its day. Euparkeria was one of many reptile species that lived during the first few million years of the Triassic in what is now South Africa. This small carnivore had a mouth full of sharp teeth and was covered in scaly skin embedded with bony plates along its back and tail. A close cousin of the Archosaurs, it showed many characteristics that developed more fully in dinosaurs and other archosaurs. Longer back legs allowed it to run or stand upright at times, which gave it the life-saving advantage of speed and agility, and its skull had a large opening in front of the eye that housed an enlarged space or sinus, which points to a good sense of smell. A crocodile-like body characterizes a group of fossil vertebrates known as phytosaurs. These reptiles, some of which grew to sizes close to that of tyrannosaurs, lived for about 25 million years during the late Triassic. One of the most studied is Parasuchus. Complete skeletons have been found in India, as well as fragmentary fossils all across the world. Its name means similar to crocodile, which fits this sprawling, fish-eating reptile. Ichthyosaurs were exceptionally abundant from 225 to 200 million years ago. One of the most recognizable is Staganolepis. Like all ichthyosaurs, this animal shielded its body with bony armor plates. Its skull was short and deep, and ended in a shovel-like snout that was useful for uprooting tubers or slurping bugs from the mud. It is a common fossil find in the late Triassic rocks of Scotland. Ornithosuchus may look like a dinosaur, but its skeleton suggests that it is a crocodilian arch. Hosaur. among the largest predators in its ecological niche 230 million years ago. When the first dinosaurs were evolving, Ornithosuchus spent most of its time on 4 legs, but had the ability to walk or run on 2. Its sharp teeth indicate that it was a carnivore. Post-Apocalyptic is one of the best known and most studied members of the Rauisuchians, a large group of Triassic Archosaurs. Like the Ornithosuchians to which Ornithosuchus belongs, this group is part of the same lineage as modern crocodiles and included some of the largest predators of the day. Post-Apocalyptic grew to about 4.6 meters in length and may have weighed as much as 680 kilograms. In many ways it resembles the large theropod dinosaurs of the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, which is why it was first described as a primitive ancestor of Tyrannosaurus. Indeed, the large skull and banana-shaped cutting teeth do resemble those of the more well-known carnivorous dinosaurs. However, its ankle anatomy and the presence of bony plates down the back strongly support placing Post-Apocalyptic among the crocodile line of Archosaurs. Although Post-Apocalyptic is not a true dinosaur, it did live alongside some of the oldest theropod dinosaurs, which it probably also ate. Perhaps unexpectedly, it was much larger than these early theropods and was clearly the main predator in North America during the late Triassic. One of the weirdest-looking creatures of the late Triassic world was Pangaea. This archosaur was a sleek, fast-running omnivore. It lived alongside early dinosaurs such as Coelophysis, as well as large Rauisuchian predators. Pangaea greatly resembles a theropod dinosaur in its overall body plan. It was bipedal, had large attachment sites on its pelvis for strong leg muscles, possessed a long tail for balance, and had holes in its neck vertebrae for air sacs. In fact, when its close cousin Shuvosaurus was discovered in 1994, it was described as a late Triassic ostrich dinosaur, due to its bird-like, toothless skull. It has a similar skull capped with a beak at its front, which was perfect for cracking seeds, grinding nuts, and possibly shearing vegetation and killing small vertebrates. However, despite their resemblance to theropods, Pangaea is clearer. Why a member of the crocodile line? Because it has crocodilian features. This is a prime example of convergence, distantly related organisms independently evolving the same body shape in response to a similar shared lifestyle. A barrel-chested quadruped with an array or fan-like spines on its neck and back, Lodosaurus lived about 240 million years ago, when the world's continents were joined together. This allowed it to migrate around the globe. The Lodosaurus skull was lightweight, lacked teeth and had a sharp beak, the elongated spines on its vertebrae, more than 3 times as long as an individual vertebra is deep, may have been used to attract mates or regulate body temperature. Eudomorphodon is one of the oldest and most primitive pterosaurs, and its fossilized remains are common in the folded rocks of the mountains of northern Italy. It was clearly a pterosaur, possessing all of the characteristics of this group of flying reptiles, including a greatly enlarged fourth finger that supported the wing membrane. It was a relatively small pterosaur, weighing about 10 kilograms. This weight pales in comparison to the monstrous proportions of its later relatives, such as Quetzalcoatlus. It is also distinguished from most other pterosaurs by its complex teeth. Whereas most pterosaurs had simple teeth, or even lacked them altogether, Eudomorphodon boasted a mouthful of bizarre teeth, each with several small points called cusps. These would have been perfect for grabbing and grinding prey, and may have been an adaptation for eating large fish. Only an adult Terrestriacus approached 1 meter in length and most weighed less than 15 kilograms. The skull was lightweight and fragile, and many limb and bones were pencil-thin. However, this tiny carnivore was one of the oldest relatives of the present-day crocodile, although it had a very different lifestyle to the modern reptile. It was a small, slender and agile carnivore that walked with its body raised off the ground. It was able to sprint at high speeds on all 4 legs. In many ways, Sphenasuchians resemble small theropod dinosaurs, but, like living crocodiles, they had bony plates in their skin, and elongated bones in their wrists. Herrerasaurus is one of the oldest, most primitive dinosaurs yet discovered. This small predator lived about 228 million years ago and shared its ecosystem with an array of primitive reptiles that would eventually be supplanted by the dinosaurs. Even at first glance, Herrerasaurus resembles a carnivorous dinosaur. It walked on 2 legs, boasted an array of sharp claws and had jaws studded with numerous serrated teeth. It was clearly a brawny predator that could outrun and overpower its prey. During an expedition to Argentina in the late 1980s, a scientist named Paul Sereno and his team came across a curious fossil no larger than a small human child. This skeleton was clearly a dinosaur with an open hip socketon, enlarged muscle attachment on the upper arm bone and other characteristic features. In many ways it resembled a carnivorous theropod because of its sharp teeth, killer claws and the ability to walk on two hind legs. Sereno named this dinosaur Eoraptor, one of the most primitive dinosaurs ever found. Barely larger than a human toddler, Staurikosaurus raced across the lowland plains of South America during the first few million years of the reign of dinosaurs. Very little is known about this nimble hunter since only one fossil skeleton has been discovered. However, it is clear that it was an agile and dangerous predator and resembled a theropod dinosaur in its general body shape. It is difficult to determine whether it was a true theropod or more primitive dinosaur that simply looked like a theropod because of shared carnivorous lifestyle. However, it is likely the Staurikosaurus is close cousin of Herrerasaurus. However, it was a much smaller, lighter animal. 0.2 s, greater than, and as a result was probably able to run much faster than its heavier relative. Liliensternus was a large, ferocious predator that lived in Central Europe 210 million years ago. In fact, it was the largest land predator of its day. Its long hind legs allowed for great speed, its short arms ended in sharp clawed hands, and its jaws were stubbed with serrated teeth. It feasted on large prosauropod herbivores, which inhabited wet, humid lowlands during the late Triassic. Unfortunately, only 2 skeletons have been found, so it is difficult to know whether or not Liliensternus traveled in packs. Gojirasaurus prowled across the arid scrublands of North America 210 million years ago, and is named after the Japanese movie monster Godzilla. It seems strange that a 7 meters long predator is named after the colossal monster of popular culture. However, during its time in the late Triassic, most predatory dinosaurs were small. Gojirasaurus stood out as the largest, strongest and fiercest hunter of the American Southwest. Unfortunately, only a few bones have been found, and scientists have much to learn about this carnivore. This small herbivore lived 225 million years ago. Adults barely grew to 2 meters long and weighed around 12 to 125 kilograms. A tiny, primitive cousin of later giants such as Brachiosaurus, Saturnalia lived alongside a curious mixture of early dinosaurs and more primitive reptiles such as Rhynchosaurs and Dicynodonts. About 205 million years ago, much of the Bristol Channel area of western England was filled with a network of caves. An entire ecosystem of small creatures inhabited these caverns, including some of the earliest mammals and many types of lizards. Dinosaurs also lived here, including the common, primitive sauropodomorph the Cadontosaurus. This skinny herbivore, which grew to no more than 3 meters in length and weighed between 20 to 30 kilograms, took refuge in the caves when threatened by predators. Usually this was an effective strategy, but every so often a cave collapsed, entombing the Cadontosaurus and other animals that were inside. The prosauropod Plateosaurus is one of the best understood dinosaurs. Most dinosaurs are known from only a few scraps of bone, or at most, a single skeleton, but Plateosaurus is represented by more than 50 complete skeletons. Most of these have come from the late Triassic basins of Germany, which were deposited 220 million years ago by a series of large rivers. Other specimens have turned up in the glacier-covered rocks of Greenland, and even in drill cores from the bottom of the North Sea. These specimens have allowed scientists to study this dinosaur in remarkable detail. Plateosaurus was one of the largest prosauropods, and some individuals were 10 meters long and weighed 700 kilograms. Its long mouth was crammed full of leaf-shaped teeth, and th. Were covered in rough bumps that were perfect for grinding vegetation. It is likely that Plateosaurus could walk on either 2 or 4 legs, although recent research suggests that this animal's arms and hands were not very suitable for locomotion and instead were used mainly for collecting food. One of the few known Triassic ornithischians, Equator, was a small and extremely fast herbivore from what is now South Africa. It had most of the major features of ornithischians, including a backward-turned pubis bone in the pelvis and leaf-shaped teeth for chewing plants. However, it also possessed an elongated hand with sharp claws, which were possibly used to supplement a herbivorous diet by catching the occasional small mammal or reptile. This barrel-chested, pig-like herbivore lived across half the world and survived the violent Permo-Triassic mass extinction that wiped out up to 95% of all species. Lacerda had a wide body, a slow, sprawling gait, and an enormous skull with a horny beak and two tusk-like canine teeth. The canines were probably used for display or defense, and the beak was a perfect tool for shearing through plant stems and branches. It probably weighed less than 100 kilograms. Dicynodonts, reptile-like cousins of mammals, were some of the most successful herbivores of the late Permian to Middle Triassic periods. One of the last surviving members of this once great group was Placerias. Resembling an ancient hippopotamus, it reached weights of as much as 2,000 kilograms. It lived approximately 220 million years ago in southwestern USA and was the largest herbivore in the region. Although it lived alongside early carnivorous dinosaurs, Placerias was such a successful plant eater that it was much more abundant than rival herbivores. Its skull was ornamented with two enormous tusks that were probably used for social display. Fossil discoveries suggest Placerias traveled in large herds. Only a few groups survived into the Triassic period, including the Dicynodonts. The rhinoceros-sized Cannemyria was descended from one of these and had large canine tusks but otherwise lacked teeth. Instead, it possessed a beak for cropping food, and horny plates lined its mouth. Just as in modern turtles, tough plant matter was pulped by the forward and backward closing modi. On of the jaws, this body plan for herbivores was clearly successful, because it remained largely unchanged for the next 50 million years in successive Dicynodonts after Cannemyria. Thrinaxodon, a cat-sized predator, was the most common cynodont of the early Triassic. Like mammals, it had a distinct waist in front of its hips. In addition, its broad ribs interlocked with each other, stiffening its body and making it difficult to breathe via rib movement alone. This suggests that Thrinaxodon used a diaphragm to breathe and points to an evolving mammal-like metabolism and similar activity levels. Its limbs were held almost under its body, as in mammals, and this further supports the suggestion that it was an active animal, capable of running. Cynognathes means dogjaw, and this mammal-like reptile had a large canine tooth on either side of its upper and lower jaws. A single bone, the dentary, made up most of its lower jaw, a feature more common in modern mammals than reptiles. Cynognathes was probably an extreme carnivore and ate nothing but meat. It possessed blade-like teeth behind its canine teeth for slicing flesh. Its skull also had a wide area for holding large jaw muscles, suggesting that Cynognathes possessed powerful bite. Morgan-Eucodon, one of the earliest true mammals, was described in 1949 from thousands of teeth, jaws, and fragments of bone from a South Wales quarry. A small, shrew-sized insect eater, it was probably nocturnal and had a good sense of smell. Like the most advanced cynodonts, Morgan-Eucodon had a double jaw joint. The new mammalian joint lying alongside the old reptilian one. The reduced size of the old jaw joint bones indicates more acute hearing in Morgan-Eucodon. Many early mammals retained this condition, and fossils show that the fully enclosed middle ear and single jaw joint of modern mammals evolved independently in monotremes on the one hand, and the marsupials and placental mammals on the other.